Shadows on Media. This is Coming Out Stories. It's a podcast about one of the most important conversations of your life. I'm Emma Goswell. Time now to hear from lesbian singer-songwriter Katey Brookes. She had a really unique childhood, growing up in a religious cult that was actually based in Arizona.
I mean, I think it took me really quite a long time, and not even until recently did I think I really struggled with the word. I was more comfortable with bisexual. I have been with men. It's not even that I don't find men physically attractive, because I do. I don't find the idea of that repulsive or anything. I just don't fall in love with them. So that's why it just makes sense to be, Yeah.
So all your relationships have been with women?
Yeah, all my love relationships have been women, but it got. I think it got to a point where I think it was my only like two years ago. I was like, actually, I've got to stop calling myself bisexual, because I really never plan on having a relationship with a man. And the definition of bisexual, I suppose that I could fall into that category technically, but it felt more empowering actually to go, no, hold on. I need to own this, So you're totally owning it now. But did you have relationships when you were at school or as a teenager? With women? No. So I always knew, I think from the age of 6, I remember actually sitting down at a table with my mum and one of my friends, and I remember back then having these feelings for one of my friend's older sister, and it seemed completely normal to me. I had a massive crush, and I remember really wanting to impress her. And I thought to myself, I feel like I need to talk to the people I'm close to about this, like 5, 6 years old. So I sat them down, and I think I sort of alluded to it at the time. I felt like I had to confess. And through the years, I had these on-off kind of feelings. I didn't really know what they meant, and I always had little boyfriends. And I was always the girl with a boyfriend growing up. And it wasn't until I was 15 that I just completely fell madly in love with one of my best friends, and was like, something's not, I don't think that this is just me admiring her. I actually think I want something to happen. But unfortunately, it was unrequited.
Oh, did you try to get something to happen?
I did. Oh, yeah. I'm definitely like, when I want something, I go for it. So I told her, I think about 6 months in, after having a conversation with my mum, who I always felt very comfortable with, I was very close to her. I said to her, I remember sitting down actually and chatting to her over the kitchen table and saying, Mum, have you ever had like feelings for a female friend before? And she just went into this amazing story about this connection she had with a friend as a teenager. And what was really bizarre was the name of that person was the same as the girl I was in love with. I was like, that is a really weird coincidence. Yeah. And from then on, my mum became my confidant. And then about 6 months later, I was like, I really need to tell her. So I sat her down one evening. I said, I've got these feelings for you. And she was amazing about it. She was so lovely. But she was also quite confusing for quite some time. I think the whole thing probably maybe did her head in a little bit, teenager. And
did it ruin the friendship? Because that's always the danger, isn't it?
Yes and no. We had turbulent times because we got on really, really well, and I don't think she wanted to lose me. But there were times where, I'd get drunk, teenage drunkenness, and probably kind of push the boundaries a little bit in terms of like, I think you do have feelings for me, like you're confusing me, all that teenage angst. So we fell out a few times, but we made it through, and I'm actually still friends with her, years and years later. So she's a wonderful person. She's married with a kid now. So.
Wonderful. So just rewinding to the conversation when you were 5 or 6, with your mum as well, you said you sat down with people closest to you. Yeah. Do you remember what you said and what they said?
Well, the funny thing is I've got the memory, but I remember feeling like I wanted to, but I'm not altogether sure whether I actually went through with it. I remember knowing even back then that it was a big deal, despite the fact that we had a lot of gay friends. What with, I'm sure we're going to talk about, this growing up in the cult. There was a lot of people who were in threesomes, like live-in threesomes. There were a lot of lesbians. I was kind of exposed to different lifestyles from a young age. So it's kind of odd because that was normal to me, and yet there was something in me that felt the shame. So I'm not. And I think maybe that came from my dad's side of the family, not from my dad. My dad has always been really supportive of my sexuality, but my dad's side of the family were quite old-fashioned. When I went through a phase where I wanted to be a boy when I was really little, and asked everyone to call me Peter and cut my hair, and
Really?
I didn't talk about this for years. And then one day I was on Diva FM. Do you know Diva magazine?
Yeah.
So their radio station. I was on Diva FM talking about my single "Never Gonna Let Her Go," I think it was, or "In Your Arms," and the story just came out. I was like, oh my God, I never talked about this publicly. And then suddenly I was like, well, actually, maybe I should, because there's no shame in it. And actually, there's a lot of people I've met and go, oh God, yeah, I really wanted to be a boy when I was little, or I really wanted to be a girl. It didn't manifest into anything. But I often wonder, maybe it might have done had I not been shamed by the cult for it, because I got really badly shamed by the cult and also that side of the family.
For wanting to be called Adam?
Peter.
Sorry,
yeah.
Peter. Who's Adam?
Peter Adam.
Yeah. So, do you know, it's more common than you think, I think. Lucy Spraggan as well went through a phase, for want of a better word, and demanded to be called Max for a few years when she was a kid.
Yeah, I think it's really common. I know a good few people who've said the same thing and who've sort of turned out, I mean, I would say I'm quite feminine, although I'm quite sort of, I've got my baggy jeans on today, but whatever feminine means, I don't even know what feminine means. It's different for everybody. But I'm happy being a woman. I feel like a woman. But it felt really real for me back then. And I can honestly say that I don't know if, and I'll tell you the story in a minute, but had I not had these quite shaming episodes in that very pivotal point in my life around the age of 4 or 5, maybe I would want to identify as a man now. I don't know. Who knows?
So you alluded to the fact that there was a lot of shaming, and you alluded to the fact that you grew up in a religious cult. From what age was that?
I believe I was about 3 or 4. And it was till I was 10, 11. Obviously, I was young. So getting the sort of timeline right is tough. But, I don't really have much of a memory before being in the cult, to be honest. It just felt like that was life.
So, when you say a cult, is it somewhere that you lived and they had certain ways of doing things? What was day-to-day life like?
Well, it's really funny because someone asked me what the definition of a cult was yesterday. Nobody's ever asked me that. And actually, what is the definition of a cult? It's kind of like, well, we actually nearly moved to Arizona, where the sort of HQ was, where the leaders lived. Fortunately, we didn't. Although my mum bankrupted herself with the amount of trips that we took. Very expensive. She gave all of her money. We lost the house because she gave it all to them. But we moved to London. So I was born in Bristol. And we moved back and forth for a while, and then we moved to London to be with the sort of the London HQ.
Yeah, but so it's an American cult, but you were in the UK.
Yeah, it's an American cult, and it's been going for a really long time. And so we lived in sort of shared houses with other cult members, and our whole life was the cult. I did, funnily enough, actually was in another. Actually, it is. If you look it up, it's actually it is counted as a cult, although no one would ever admit to it, that my dad was actually involved in, where they wouldn't let you go to school. They built their own school, or they just bought a house and put the children in it and just put them in different rooms and gave them books and said, learn. That's what happened to my oldest sister. And you weren't allowed to spend any time with anyone outside of that group of people. And it was the same with the next cult we were involved in, which my dad had nothing to do with. It was my mum after they split up.
So you were in 2 cults?
Yeah. It was really, really cult vibes going on from the age of, maybe a year old, and so my older sisters would remember a little bit more about the one my dad got us involved with. So then when my parents split up, we moved back to Bristol, because when I was 8 months we moved to London. Then my parents split up, we moved back to Bristol when I was a few years old, and then we moved back to London for this other cult, which I said to you before. I've decided not to name at this point in my life, just because I don't think I'm in a place where I would want to cope with any. Maybe I wouldn't get any contact from anyone, but I really don't want that right now.
Absolutely understandable. So you were not permitted to go to school then? normal school?
No, we did go to normal school. We just didn't hang out with any of the kids. We just went to school and left. And I went to school with some of the cult members, one of whom became my sort of lifelong best friend, but unfortunately passed away some years ago. But no, there was no engagement with these kids outside of that.
Okay. And what did the cult believe then? Was it sort of based around the Bible? Was it sort of similar preachings? Well, I mean, what did they preach about LGBT people?
They thought that. Well, they were. The interesting thing about them is that they were. It depended what suited them. So at one point, they believed you could live forever in your physical body, and so I remember being taught that people who died should be embarrassed. That was the party line. Like, if you should be embarrassed and shamed, like anyone. So if anyone did die who was a close member of the cult, it was because they just didn't believe enough. And actually the founder died a few years ago, and that's exactly what the two other founders said. Oh, well, he used to walk the walk, but sometimes we felt he just wasn't talking the talk. Like, I think you're just saying this because you still want power, control and money. So with the LGBT, well, what happened? Because I remember the female. So there was two guys and a woman, and they were in a relationship together, running this. So I don't think that they were. I think they were open to homosexuality.
So they were a throuple.
They were a throuple. Yeah.
Okay.
Which back in the 80s, and 90s, it was a pretty big deal. And this was a big thing. They were on This Morning TV. Like, there's documentaries about them. I was asleep under my mum's chair once, about 5. We were in Arizona, and this was when I was really going through the PETA thing. And I'd cut my hair short, and because I don't really do anything by halves, so I was like, nope. So everyone at school had to call me PETA. It was a thing. And I woke up to hear the female leader, who was a very charismatic but also terrifying woman, and their kind of tool, their powerful tool, was shame. That's how they control people. She pinpointed my mum, and we're in a room, hundreds of people in this room, and she singled her out and started saying how disgusting and wrong it was that my mum had this little girl who was parading around like a little boy, and how unnatural it was, and something should be done, and that my mother was a bad mother. And I remember being underneath Mum's chair, and I literally physically felt her shame sink down the chair through into me. I could feel it, this heavy weight. Like, my mum, I really felt for her. It was kind of like a heavy weight to carry as a little kid. And so I felt her shame, and then I felt my shame, and I was like, God, I'm wrong, I'm bad, I'm disgusting, there's something wrong with me. I must change immediately. And that was such a powerful message for me as a kid, and something I carried for a really long time. And then I remember afterwards feeling so much like I wanted to please this woman, and that if I did, everything would be okay, that I would be accepted. So I said to my mum, okay, I'll change, but can you ask her if I'm allowed to wear dungarees? And I think about that little kid, and I just want to give it a little hug. Do you know what I mean? It's like...
And how did your mum react when she was pinpointed out in a big room of people? Did she say anything? Can you remember?
No, she didn't. She didn't protect herself or me. Well, my mum was, I love my mum, but she had a lot of, damage herself, and she wasn't in a place where she felt strong enough to go, excuse me, am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, well, you can.
Excuse me, like, fuck off. Who the fuck do you think you are? Like, I'll raise my child how I want to, and actually, if this is what she wants and makes her happy, then I support her. That would have been the right thing to say, but she just, she was ashamed herself. I think it hit certain buttons, certain trigger points for her. She had a tough time growing up.
So that would have affected you for years then, I guess. Did you change at all? Did you try and dress differently?
100%. That's why I say God knows, who I'd be now, because I immediately, overnight, was like, okay, I need to be a little girl now. I'm back in my place. What was I thinking? Okay, what does a little girl wear? Because I didn't like little girl stuff at all. None of it. I couldn't connect with any of it. So, I bought pink. Hated pink, but I bought it and grew my hair long again. And, 3 years later, they were over in London, and we were what they call a convergence. And, again, hundreds of people in the room, and I'm sat on my mum's lap listening to this woman preach. And she was so powerful and intense that when she spoke, I would start crying. It was just, it was quite jarring. It was like... It's like a hammer, but it hit me somewhere. I think when I think back now, it's like trauma coming out, like through tears. Like, this is too much, but I didn't understand it. And she saw me in the crowd, and she was like, "Oh my God, look at you!" And she took me and she carried me onto the stage and put me on her lap. And she was like, 3 years ago, she was on the wrong path. And she started sort of describing what I was like and saying how wrong it wasn't. And now look at her. She's a beautiful little girl, exactly as God intended. I know. And I remember feeling such pride and relief. And I'm a good girl now, What a message to give a child.
And how old were you then?
8.
8 years old.
I know. So it's like, if I'm this, I'm wrong, I'm disgusting. It's basically, if I'm who I am, and I am expressing that in the most beautiful, natural form, and I'm just going with it, I'm a free child, then I'm disgusting, I'm wrong, I should be ashamed, and so should my mother. If I toe the line and I do what you want me to do, and I fit into societal norms, then I'm a good girl and I'm acceptable.
So years later, when you decided or realised that you were bisexual or gay, you were not in a place to come out in the cult, really?
No, I mean, it wouldn't have... I don't think it would have even come to mind at the time. I remember actually having a friend who was very affectionate when we were in the cult, and I remember shaming her, actually, me being the shame, because I was so inwardly homophobic that I was like, I think she's a lesbian because she touched my shoulders. I couldn't cope with because of the intensity in the cult and the lack of boundaries. If anyone kind of came near me, I found that really difficult, especially if it was a woman. So this poor little girl, I basically told her close friends that I thought she was a lesbian, really upset her, and I will always feel good. We're actually on good terms now, a few years later. I mean, I was 8. But no, I mean, through the years, I think I desperately wanted to be a straight girl. I really did. I really wanted an easy life, I wanted to be... I thought, if I'm straight and I have a boyfriend and he looks good and we look good together, then everything's all right and I'll fit in. I just wanted to fit in.
And was your mum sort of backing them up and saying, yeah, you do need to grow your hair and wear a dress?
I can't say I honestly remember what she said. I do know that she supported my change, so...
But, I mean, you got out eventually, didn't you? Did you and your family leave the cult?
Yes, we did. We moved back to Bristol, and then the sort of family sort of disbanded. My oldest sister, actually, she moved to live with her dad when I was 7, and then my other sister moved to live with our dad when I was 10. So it was just me and my mum from the age of about 10. And then life was, took a slightly different path.
A less religious one?
Definitely. What was it like? Yeah, I mean, I think my mum always had to be involved in something intense. So she got involved with things that I didn't have to really be involved with, but also felt quite left field.
So what was it like then when you finally did come out to her? Did admit it that to her?
I think it's really weird because we talk about coming out stories. It never felt like coming out, although it was coming out. Yeah. It wasn't kind of like I need to sit you down and tell you that, because I didn't want to put a name on it for years. Not again until like 2 years ago. I talked about it. All my close friends knew. I lived with a woman for like 3 years and had a great relationship. And, I was dating women all through my 20s, but also trying to date men at the same time, going back and hoping that if I just dated the right one, or if I just did this or that, somehow I could, I really wanted to be straight. But
that shame was still in you then, wasn't it?
Oh, I mean, I was talking to my ex-girlfriend, one of my ex-girlfriends the other day, about this, and because I was writing the answers to an interview, and I was writing, and I realised that she had a big, she contributed a lot to that shame falling away, and because when we got together, we had a massive age gap. She was a lot younger than me, and she was over from Australia, and she just was so. I was the first woman she'd been with, but she would just took to it like a duck to water, and she was
quick learner.
She was a quick learner, and she just. I remember saying to her after we sort of first got together, I was like, I hope this isn't, weird for you. I know it's quite a big deal when it first happens, and I hope, look, you can have space. She was like, no, on the contrary, I think it's really beautiful and natural. And I thought, oh, maybe it is. And the more she kind of instilled that in me, and the more she would take my hand in public, which is something I could never do, even in my long-term relationship, never be public at all. I was terrified of judgment. I was terrified of abuse and persecution. She would just take my hand, and living in London, suddenly everything felt more liberal and anything goes. And I suddenly looked around me and thought, actually, maybe this is really cool. Like, this is all right. I think I can let this go. And it just slowly started to slip away. And it's one feeds the other, because, the more I behaved in a way that was suggesting or saying, I don't have any shame, the less shame I felt.
And that gave you the courage to sort of tell other people then, did it?
Yeah, like I say, my friends always knew, but I never used the G word, and I never used the L word. I absolutely hated the word lesbian for years.
What is it about that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's a great word. No. Got to be honest. It's not the best word. It's like my other word I hate is pamphlet. Absolutely.
Never heard anyone hate the word pamphlet.
So, I mean, if you hand me a pamphlet about lesbians, I've got a pamphlet for you, it's about lesbians, I might have to go and sort of vomit somewhere. It's just something about those. And it's a bit moist from the rain.
Oh, moist. Everyone hates moist.
Everyone hates the word moist.
God.
Yeah.
So you didn't ever have that sit-down conversation with your mum then?
No, well, it was that time when I was 15, and I said to her, Mum, I think I've got feelings for a girl. And that was it, really. That was it. And then it was the same with my dad and my stepmum, who were also just beautiful. I mean, I've been really, really lucky with my family. They've always been wonderful about it. Like, my dad, it was when I was 18, and I'd been dating this South African girl, and it was a crazy fling, and she wasn't, at the time, she wasn't very nice. Also on good terms with her years later. But I can't remember what it is. I mentioned it to my stepmom. I think I was visiting, and I was like, oh, maybe you could drop it into conversation with Dad. Anyway, so I think she did, and then we were all sat down one day, and he was like, listen, Kate, I don't care who you date as long as they treat you well and you're happy. I really don't care. I want to make that really, really clear. And that was lovely, and they've always been amazing to my girlfriends. They love, it's just lovely and sweet, and it's not a thing.
And as a child, those are the exact words that you want to hear, aren't they, really?
100%. It's like, breathe a sigh of relief. The people that you love most and who love you the most, and whose opinions actually do matter to you, knowing that, and I know, because I don't like saying, knowing that they accept me, it's not about I don't need to be accepted. This isn't something to be accepted. Knowing that they love me and don't care, that's what I want to know. Not that they accept it, and they don't care.
Well, I normally end by sort of asking advice to people coming out, but I think for you the question is more like, if you could speak to like your younger self or young people going through that shame that you felt, how would you tell them to get over that shame, rather than cope with coming out necessarily, but it's about how you deal with it yourself, isn't it?
Well, that's the thing, I think, because I think it's an inside job. Once you've confronted it and faced it with yourself, then it's much easier with everybody else, because you don't care what people think then. But if you haven't dealt with your own feelings about it, if you are carrying any shame, then you're always going to care what people think. So I would say, I mean, shame's a big one. It's not something you can just shake off. So if you are unfortunate enough to have been shamed and to be carrying these sort of deep, heavy weights, then I would say maybe it's important to go and talk to someone to help you process it. I'm always an advocate of that, of going and helping someone, maybe even a professional who can help you just unpick it in your mind and in your heart, so that you can release it, because it's completely unwarranted shame. You've got nothing to feel ashamed of. Who you are is beautiful, and love is beautiful. So I'd say, talk to someone you trust, or even, some counselling if you need to. I also find this, I've been recommending this on all my interviews recently, affirmations are probably the most powerful thing I've found in the past few years, in terms of changing the way you think and feel about yourself. And I used to think, when my mum used to suggest them years ago, and I was like, affirmations, it's not going to work, that's, but actually...
So give us a quick affirmation then. What's one that you tell yourself?
I love myself with all my perfections and imperfections. I am enough.
I love that, that's wonderful. Now, you talked about unpicking it and celebrating it. I think you kind of do that through your music, don't you? Was there ever a moment when you thought, I'm not going to sing about women, I'm going to try and be straight with my music, or was that never an option for you?
I could never bring myself to say he, although I did in one song, because there was a man when I was 20 that I broke up with because he wasn't a woman, but that I loved dearly, and so I used a he. But I just used you. I just wouldn't use the female pronoun because I was scared. I was scared of judgment. But I could never do that again.
And you certainly celebrate it now with your music.
I do, loud and proud.
Cool. And if people want to go and find your music, where can they find it?
So you can find me on Spotify. My name is with an EY, Katey Brookes, or you can go on my website. There's loads going on there now. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, all under Katey Brookes.
Katey Brookes, thank you so much for chatting to us.
It's my pleasure, Emma. Thank you for coming and chatting with me.
Massive thank you to Katey Brookes for sharing her unique story with me. You may have heard a couple of seagulls in the background there. That's because I recorded the interview in Llandudno just after Elfest Music Festival, at which she performed. And I tell you what, please do check out her music. It is brilliant. Please do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from. We'd also love to hear from you on Twitter. You can find us there at Come Out Stories. I'm Emma Goswell. And Coming Out Stories is a What Goes On media production. Next time round, you'll hear from James Barr. You'll know him for being an out and proud radio presenter, stand-up comedian and star of the hit podcast A Gay and a Non-Gay. He wasn't always out, though. He told me he was actually quite religious in his youth and struggled with coming out.
At that point, I came out to not my mum, but my sister, who was on a gap year in Canada. And I emailed her and said, I'm gay. And she and I were both very Christian, so I used a lot of Bible verses to tell her that it was actually okay and that God still loved me, and